That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco, and today we got a special one, folks. It's must-have handcuffs. That's right. It is getting cold outside. You're tidied up. The leaves are changing, and you're thinking to yourself, it's cuffing season. And I'm talking about fantasy football handcuffs, baby. Let's discuss some of the must-have guys you have to have on your roster if you have a stud, starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And welcome in, folks. Honestly, I'm super excited today because we have a trifecta. Obviously, Dave Crews. I don't even know if I know Derek anymore. I don't even know what his handle is at this point because I don't even know if Derek's even still a part of Razzball. It's just getting insane. Dave Crews has just become, I don't know how to explain it, but you're like my elf on the shelf. You know what I mean? You're just, you know what I mean? Like whenever I'm like, I forget about you, boom, you're right there. You're always there stepping up. At this point, it's the Razzball Fantasy Football Dave Crews podcast because you're on every damn show and we love every second of it. Thank you for joining, Dave. We appreciate it, man. What's going on?
We're here to talk about some running backs that we can look outside of the top guys because it is a barren position in fantasy this year. So let's talk about some of the guys we can back up our guys with.
Yeah. And so obviously I feel like when it comes to hosting, I'm Sky's handcuff. Like Sky is the RB1 of hosting Razzball, but he seems to go down with a few injuries on Sundays these days. So I feel like you want to have your handcuff ready. That's why Sky Guasco is doing a little flip this time. He's actually going to be just chilling today, hanging out, bringing the analysis. Sky Guasco, man, what's going on, buddy?
I love it, man. I'm happy to be a handcuff, happy to be a starter. Whatever's best for the team, Bob. You know me. I'm a good clubhouse guy first, then I put in the work. So whatever you need from me, I'm here for you. And Jamie's already in the chat, excited for a second night in a row of Roschon Johnson talk. He's been waiting 2 years for us to care about Roschon, and unfortunately, it is the time of season for us to do so. So, Jamie, we're here for you, buddy.
I know. Jamie, a few years back, basically told us that Roschon's the next coming of Jesus Christ. And sure enough, he did not happen that way. So it's okay, buddy. But you know what? A little groin injury right now for myself and DeAndre Swift, and you'll be good to go, man. So all good. Maybe Roschon Johnson will be more than that. It
all depends on what part of Jesus' career you're talking about.
That's where we got to draw the line, folks. If we start talking about all this religious stuff, now we're going to get canceled. But you know what? The holidays are around the corner, so we appreciate all religions. We love you all, folks, and welcome to the Razzball Fantasy. Let's get back on track here. But today's show, folks, just so you know, I polled the team at Razzball, and I said, hey, guys, we need to figure out, all right, it's handcuffing season, folks. It's the time of year where stashing an RB5 or stashing a wide receiver 6 might not matter anymore. Bye weeks are behind you. It's time to actually look at which guys of your studs had their bye weeks already. Your handcuffs actually might be more valuable than some wide receiver 3s and 4s if you break down your roster. And that's what today's show really is about, is identifying who the must-have handcuffs are this season, and also maybe some other guys you guys haven't thought about that might be worth a stash as well. Before we dive into the tiers that we put together, and by the way, there will be an article breaking this down later. Before we dive into all that, I want to make sure everybody reminder, every Sunday we do a Sunday Live Start Sit Show for 2 hours before kickoff. Make sure you join us on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel, and we will discuss your Q&A, all your start sits. We break down the key injuries and weather updates, everything you need to know up until kickoff. And, of course, make sure you jump over to Razzball.com. Apparently, there's some really good writers over there. Haven't heard Dave Crews, and we have also Sky Guasco, who handles all the back-end stuff for us. We appreciate him there as well. Before we dive into the handcuff situation, guys, is there someone currently that when we talked about handcuffs, was there a certain player situation that you're monitoring first? Dave, over to you first, man. What's your first thoughts when I tell you must have handcuffs?
Well, I mean, if I get a sense that somebody's willing to part with Kareem Hunt, I mean, there's a guy with standalone value, and we don't know. First of all, we don't know when Isaiah Pacheco is coming back. And we don't know how much the Chiefs will lean on Isaiah Pacheco when he does get back. They may just kind of take it easy on him until January when they're making that championship run.
Don't tell me that, because in my biggest league, I have Pacheco in the IR spot for the last 8 weeks. So already hate the show, already hate everything you just said. So over to you, Sky.
Dave, come on, man. You got to come out stronger than that. You can't piss off the host right off the bat. You know the rules.
Unbelievable.
I did it before we got on air, so I should stop now.
I like it. Hey, I'm going to give a shout out to one of our fellow analysts here. Shout out to our friend Ben Wasley, who's down under. He's in Australia, so he's not on the program as often as I'm sure he'd love to be. But he does write 2 articles a week available at football.rasball.com for free. Great content from Ben. And in our show sheet behind the scenes that the public doesn't see, but we're all breaking down, he brought up a really great point. You know, like most of us, Dave, myself, and Bob listed everybody. Ben listed maybe 10, 12 guys. And then for the rest, he brought up a good point. And I'm not going to go through all of it because it's a lot of notes, but let's just take the Dolphins, for example. If Devon Achane goes down, Jalen Wright and Mostert probably split that role. So who is the actual handcuff? Who's the handcuff in Philadelphia? Is it Gainwell or is it Shipley? Right? Who are like in Green Bay, right? We all love Marshawn Lloyd preseason. Now he has an appendectomy out of nowhere. Like who's going to be the guy coming out? Is it Wilson? Is it Brooks? They got 3 heads there if something happens to Josh Jacobs. So in some of these scenarios, it's not just the next guy on the depth chart that is the handcuff. We've seen that over the years, right? Some guys are just strictly third down backs. That's not a handcuff to me. A handcuff is who's going to like get goal line work, get the more valued touches. So that to me is something that I'm diving a little bit deeper in when I think about handcuffs. It's not just the next guy in line. It's who's going to take on the primary focal point of that role should the guy in front of him go down.
Sure, and I kind of let that inform my rankings. So that's why for me, a guy like we listed Jalen Wright. That's why Jalen Wright is down near the end of my rankings. A guy like Marshawn Lloyd, who just came off of IR and now is on non-football injury list. He's pretty much probably done for the fantasy season. So, you know, I mean, in that case, I'd feel better about Emmanuel Wilson, right? You know, I mean, he's already contributed during the season. So
I'm going to backpedal for a second here and just say I'm not going to pat Ben on the back for doing half the job, all right? You know what, Ben? I'm tired of that. This guy's like, oh, what a good point. No, I asked for damn rankings of every damn handcuff. I want them, okay? Please factor in these other things. Like, of course I know that. Do I give a shit about Zeke Elliott? No, I don't. That's why I ranked him last, all right, folks? Like, come on. The point of today's show really is to identify who are the must-have running backs, handcuffs, and what you really need to do to acquire them. The second stage is to understand, okay, there are other names where they're more of like, there are question marks. Jalen Wright, Raheem Mostert. If Devon Achane goes down, does the coaching staff go to the veteran? That's a very good point. But Jalen Wright has passed up Raheem Mostert. It does mean something. By the way, and you could argue the number one architect of running games right now is Mike McDaniel and how well he's doing behind, maybe outside of Kyle Shanahan. But honestly, you got to want to love that guy. So he is worth a roster spot if Devon Achane goes down tomorrow, nobody is leaving Jalen Wright on waivers. I'm telling you that right now. So that means he should be ranked. That's why he should be valued. So that's what we're going to really talk about today. So let's kind of get into some of this first off. Obviously, I want to talk quickly about the split backfields. And the reason why I want to bring this up really quick is, you know, there are about 6 teams I've identified where I believe that there are 2 running backs that are on most rosters already and technically have a lot of standalone value. We have, of course, the pinnacle, which is Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. You have Rashad White and Bucky Irving, Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. Then you kind of get down to the Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but those guys are pretty much rostered across the board. Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. And the last one gets a little interesting because of the Jags situation. We have Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. Now, guys, these guys are pretty much rostered in well over 50% of leagues. My question for you is this. Number one, do you think all 6 of these guys do have standalone value? And if you do you think it's worth acquiring them? Like, for example, if you have Travis Etienne, do you want Tank Bigsby? What are you willing to give up? And the final, part 3, let's see if you guys can pull this off, is there an RB3 on these teams that you're willing to stash? Dave, up to you first.
Yeah, as far as it goes, I mean, of course, everybody wants the Detroit guys. Both of those guys probably have running back 2 value at least. Jahmyr Gibbs is a running back 1. David Montgomery's got to be at least a high RB2. When we get down to the other end of the spectrum, the Jacksonville situation, that seems to be a bit more of a mess. I mean, right now, Bigsby's hurt. ETN's not getting a lot of work even in his absence. I kind of was looking last week in deep leagues at Dearness Johnson, but that didn't pan out at all. So I'm not so much interested in the Jacksonville situation as, say, the Detroit situation or the Pittsburgh situation. About the first 4 or 5 you listed on on our sheet are very, very interesting, and I would be willing to part with pretty big pieces to acquire one of them if I wanted to have both pieces, or if I wanted to have even one of the pieces. I mean, we're talking like a high RB3, a high wide receiver 3, a low wide receiver 2. Or some kind of package.
Mute.
Yeah, geez, I don't even remember muting myself. That's how. Listen, this is what I'm talking about here, folks. This is why I'm the Handcuffs host. But anyway,
Bob, do you mean to take over? Are you good?
No, and out of spite, I'm going to just make this the worst podcast now. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Stand down. Just let me know. Hey, you just let me know if you need a water break or something. You just let me know. Tap the helmet.
It's like those commercials now that have Josh Dobbs as the backup for the husbands, which is super weird. And the other one was like Colt McCoy. I'm like, these are the backups you got? Of course they don't get. What are we talking?
I want Case Keenum climbing up on my garage instead of me. That's for sure.
That would be wonderful. Give me a Jeff Hostetler. Yeah. Honestly, let's give me a throwback there. Honestly, Steve Young, depending on what year you're talking about here, we get really, really fun with this. But anyway, how funny it would be if it was Joe Montana and he was the person struggling, and then the person called in Steve Young. Now that is a funny ass commercial. All right. Too soon. Or too late. Anyway, back to the show. But quickly, I want to talk about this. I think the Detroit Lions situation is very unique. That both these guys are top 15 guys easily, and I think that we're not worried about those. I think when you start pushing it down, obviously the other end of the spectrum is the Jags, but the guys in the middle, like Eckler and Brian Robinson, right in that sweet spot. Both guys, when they play, are pretty solid. I think I probably lean Brian Robinson when they're both healthy, but. Throw it up to you, Sky. Is there any interest in handcuffing or getting both those guys on your roster? And if so, what are you willing to trade to acquire them?
Yeah, that 6-pack is really important for you looking to acquire them in trades. I think I'll get into this as we go along, but a lot of these handcuffs we're going to talk about, there's a few high-level guys coming up that probably are not available on waivers. They're already handcuffed, so you have to trade for them if you still can. But a lot of these guys are probably just floating around waivers. It's just a matter of which ones you want to pick up, which we'll talk about in our rankings. But these kind of, obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs and Dave Montgomery aren't going anywhere. Rashad White, Bucky Irving, right? They kind of flip 1A, 1B when they go up and down. One thing that you brought up, Bob, you asked if there's any RB3s. And in this group, I do think there is one that's really sneaky. He's not going to overtake Brian Robinson or Austin Eckler. But Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler have missed time this year. And when that happens, Jeremy McNichols, who is not owned anywhere and free as can be, is available. Went for 44 yards and a touchdown. In week 5, he had 68 yards on 8 carries and 2 touchdowns in week 4 when he got some work, 8 carries and 20 yards versus the Giants. Last couple of weeks, he's just had 3 or 4 carries because both guys are back. But he's just another really deep stash if you need it in an RB3, which is a rare third handcuff. But he's shown that if one of those guys go down in that generally potent Washington offense this year, although Jaden Daniels has slowed down a little bit, but in that offense, it's great to have a free play there. So in that upper tier of those 6 teams, Bob, you mentioned, all those guys are going to have to be traded for. They're not available on waivers. Jeremy McNichols would be that kind of token, I think, that could be available. So I would go look for him. They got Dallas and Tennessee, and then one of those week 14 buys we talked about last night. There's 6 of them coming up. But then at New Orleans, Philadelphia, and Atlanta, not the best, but you could do worse. And again, if you have a free square and you have Robinson and or Eckler or both, I would go get McNichols as well.
Before I move on to the actual handcuffs, I do want to ask about Jonathan Brooks, Chuba Hubbard. This is a tough one because Jonathan Brooks is the draft capital. He's the guy that you would expect to be this explosive, first round type of talent, even though he was drafted in the second round. But in reality, he's coming off a serious injury, and they paid Chuba for a reason. Now, I don't know what that means. Like, honestly, if they really thought Jonathan Brooks was the future, would they really pay Chuba Hubbard of like a nice contract? I mean, I guess my point is here, like, Dave, if you're a Chuba Hubbard owner and you've been riding him as your RB2 with the Jonathan Brooks situation coming back, how much are you willing to offer to acquire Jonathan Brooks if you're the Chuba owner, or are you trying to get out of that Carolina situation altogether?
I'm probably right now. I'm really nervous about Jonathan Brooks. I was hoping to have him on dynasty rosters. I was hoping to use him as a keeper next year when my keeper expires this year. So I'm a little bit nervous about Jonathan Brooks. I don't know if I'm going to go overboard trying to acquire him. And I'm not even sure right now, if I wanted to get him, he's certainly going to be as cheap as he's going to be unless he's a complete dud, right? I mean, if he bombs out altogether, then you basically wasted your money. But I think if I wanted to invest in him right now, I think this is the perfect time to do it, because you don't drop $30 million over 4 years on a running back. And I know the contract isn't set up to be that full amount, but you don't drop that amount of money on a running back not to have him and not to use him. And Carolina isn't in the position to be Tampa Bay or Detroit at this point.
Especially these days. I mean, money just doesn't go that way to the position, period, right? I mean, we look back just a handful of years ago, and Le'Veon Bell's career basically ended for fantasy purposes when he sat out that season.
Yeah.
He was the top dog for 5 years, and then it just ended, and things were different when he held out to try to prove a point. It bit him, and some other guys tried to do that, but they paid Chuba. And look, the Panthers are just not a well-run organization. They have quarterback troubles, yada, yada. We could talk all day about it. When we were coming into draft season, I was all about Brooks. I drafted him everywhere. I love this kid. He just needs to get healthy. We knew he got hurt at the end of the season last year at Texas. We knew we had to wait him out. So I actually have him. I have five teams this year. I have him in 3, and he's been on my RR slot the whole time. Now it's time for him to come back, and I'm debating all the time whether I should drop him for more valuable somethings because of these bye weeks, because of playoff pushes, because of trades, because of injuries. And I've been sitting on this kid, and he hasn't done anything for me. I am keeping him, and I do want to acquire him if I have Chuba Hubbard for 2 reasons. First off, running backs are running backs. And if this kid does get healthy and he's anything close to what he was in college, I want that asset on my team for the back half of the season. Number 2, Chuba Hubbard has been electric, to be honest with you. In this offense, which is putrid otherwise, he has been phenomenal. Last week, 28 carries against the New York Football Giants, 153 on the ground, a touchdown. He was the RB2 in PPR. He was top 8 in the middle couple weeks. He's been over 100 yards 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and over 90 another 2 times. So has the bye week behind him, which I love. Kansas City, which is brutal. Tampa Bay, not great. Philly, Dallas, Arizona, Tampa Bay again down the stretch. It's a gamble. But again, if you're going to acquire one of these guys, I would do it. If you have Chuba and you can't get Brooks, honestly, Chuba might be a great trade away piece to just acquire something bigger that you need. If you don't need the running back depth and you got other guys, I would rather just bail out of the Panthers if I can. But if you do need the handcuff, then I would like to go get Brooks. He's probably cheap for 1 more week.
Yeah, I mean, the Giants game, I'm glad you started. Lead in with the most recent.
It's
there was a lot of other games he played well in. I'm a Chuba Hubbard owner. And
the best performance. By far, not even close.
No, it's,
not even close.
Honestly, this is by far not your best, all right, the way you're acting right now, okay? So I'm a little upset about it, but it's all right. Let's going to move on. My point here, though, I want to ask you guys, because today's show is, I love what you're saying, but I think we have to figure out what is a practical trade, because I think the problem, and trust me, someone who's a Chuba Hubbard owner that doesn't have Jonathan Brooks, I kind of want Brooks, but, what are you trading away that, what's a fair trade? Is Jackson Smith-Njigba for Jonathan Brooks a fair trade?
I would want JSN, no question about it. For me, it's just going to be a different it's going to be another high-level handcuff I don't need and somebody else wants. Yeah. However, I am a little bit unorthodox when it comes to handcuffs in general. So for sake of this show, I'm following the rules because Bob's the boss tonight, and that's what the game is.
Yeah.
But if I was running the show, I might take a different angle, which is basically sometimes, depending on the league and what makes sense, I actually like to acquire. Let's say I have Najee Harris, right? Jalen Warren is awesome, but I'd be looking to have Trey Benson or something if somebody else had James Conner, because I want the second number 2 guy in case something happens. So sometimes I like to have that high level. Now, if I have Christian McCaffrey, I have to have that handcuff because that's the role and I want the role. But sometimes the other player is just not up to par, so I want a different player. So in that scenario, if I was maybe to trade away like Jonathan Brooks, I don't need him or something, I would go with another high-level handcuff that I didn't need. Trey Benson, I'll just throw it out there because I just mentioned him, so maybe swap for swap to James Conner owner if that's who he's got.
Okay. All right, let's get into the handcuffs. So let's talk a little bit about tier 1, the must-have handcuffs. So I actually reached out to the guys, and honestly, shout out to the Rasball team. I really appreciate you guys stepping in, giving me your full list. Except Ben, Matt, and Dave left half the names out, and Derek I did have. So basically, thank you, Sky, for doing all the right information.
Whatever I can do for the team, Bob. Whatever I can do for the team.
You're my sweet angel, and I love you, buddy. So let's talk about the must-have guys. So we basically took everybody's consensus, and honestly, the great news is it kind of did break in a way where we actually got some good tiers, and so we've identified 8 guys that we consider must-haves. So I'm going to give the list, and I'm going to ask each Dave and Sky to come up with some reasonable trades if you are the RB1 owner. So, for example, let's start at the top. Our consensus number 1 handcuff was Kareem Hunt for the Chiefs. Let's talk, and honestly, at the beginning of the show, Dave did a really good job breaking down. This is probably unique because he has so much standalone value right now. He's going to be a lot harder to acquire than maybe a couple of these other guys. Because number 2, we have Ray Davis, then Braylon Allen, Trey Benson, Jordan Mason, Tyler Algier, Blake Corum, and Zach Charbonnet. So those guys, those 7 other guys are probably a lot easier to acquire than Kareem Hunt. So I guess let's kind of leave Kareem Hunt maybe out of this for now, because I don't really think if you're a Isaiah Pacheco owner, and listen, if you want to talk about it, that's fine, but I think you're going to have to give up a lot to get Kareem Hunt. So let's focus more on 2 through 8. Let's say, for example, you're the James Cook owner. What would you be willing to trade away to get Ray Davis? Or are you on the flip side and say, I don't care, I don't want Ray Davis? So let's go to you, Dave, first. What's your thoughts about this first tier of handcuffs? What's your kind of trade scenario you're thinking?
Yeah, well, if we're starting with, say, for example, Ray Davis, for me, he's not yet getting enough touches to warrant a super expensive player. But, you throw out a name, I think JSN's probably a little bit of an overpay, but say like a Romeo Dobbs or somebody like that, I would certainly be willing to part with one of the Packers secondary receivers, a Dobbs. I don't think I could get him for Wicks, but Dobbs or Christian Watson, those type of guys are what I would be looking to use to get Ray Davis.
Yeah, so sorry, Dave and I both in the Rasball consensus are the 2 highest personally on Ray Davis, and we've been talking about together, but also individually for the last couple of weeks. For me, in this particular tier, again, you can't always go lateral with running back to running back, right? Unless somebody has a specific need and it matches up. So for me, I'm looking at wide receiver 3s to patch a hole for somebody else, right? And I'm just looking over the last month of the season. So when you get to this part of the season, week 12 here, we got another month basically to the playoffs. You can't be looking at full season stats when you're looking at some of this stuff because it just doesn't matter. Injuries happen, bye weeks, some guys are on and off, all that kind of stuff. Emergence of rookies and everything else. And Jamie, let's keep it easy there, bud.
Hey, little Paisan. It's a big week for the Paisans in the house. You know what I mean? I love it. Jamie, thank you. Jamie's making me an offer I can't refuse. You know what I mean? I love it.
Nice. I like it. So for me, I'm just looking. Rome Odunze came up. I like that, right? The Packers wide receivers. A couple other guys that are maybe big-time names or in big-time positions, but I think are just movable pieces that probably are not your wide receiver 1 or 2. They're probably your 3 or 4. And if you need a handcuff, you need a handcuff. DeAndre Hopkins is one. He's again less than 10 PPR points the last 2 weeks after that massive debut in Kansas City, right? Just look at Quentin Johnston, who I love, but he's basically only catching touchdowns. That's going to fade. If he doesn't catch a touchdown, it's kind of a dud. He'd be somebody I would be looking to sell high. Jacoby Myers, right? He's got the bye behind him. It's a PPR thing, but I don't trust the Raiders ever. And then, some other guys, Roma Dunze, who you brought up earlier, Elijah Moore, who I know Dave likes a lot with the targets, but do we actually trust like the funneling it with the Browns with everybody else coming up? So those are some other guys I think are like having good stats that you could sell, but I don't really need them on my roster. So I might be able to like sell high, if you will, on those guys to just acquire the RB instead of expect to go 1 for 1.
So I guess the question, so I think when I'm thinking about this, like it's always going to be roster dependent, but like, for example, most of the big time handcuff guys, their buys have passed. If you look at week 14, for example, like this week, there is like guys like Bijan. If you're looking for a Tyler Algier that has a bye week this week, so it's a little bit tougher. You probably need your RB 3 and 4 this week if you have those guys. For example, Ramondre Stevenson has a bye coming up. Derrick Henry has a bye coming up. So these kind of things do mess around with this kind of projection here a little bit. But honestly, if you're evaluating your roster and currently you have Rico Dowdle as your RB4, honestly, like if there's a team out there that is struggling at RB2 and they have Ray Davis, Rico Dowdle does give them more standalone value right now, and that is a slam dunk trade, in my opinion. Like, yes, the other team, honestly, if I don't have James Cook and I've been starting Ray Davis and other guys in my RB2 spot, honestly, and I need more fantasy points, Rico Dowdle will give me more fantasy points. Guys like Jalen Warren will give me more fantasy points. So those are definitely guys that I'm willing to trade to get these must-have handcuffs. On top of that, too, when you talk about wide receivers, I guess the question is, like, the hardest part about the situation is, like, there's guys like Sky who take the opposite approach here. They like having the Trey Benson, even if they don't have James Conner. So I guess it's a really good question for you, Sky. Like, if I'm going to offer you a wide receiver 3, you just said last 5 weeks or so, let's talk about guys that are kind of in that range, like guys like Drake London, Terry McLaurin types that are, wide receiver 26 to 29. Are you asking for that level of a price if you have Trey Benson, for example, for a guy who wants to acquire his handcuff? Or would you be willing to take a tier down guys maybe like Jameson Williams, maybe even Devonta Smith types?
I mean, I'm going to ask for the stars first of all and just see what happens. So that's the first thing. But I mean, I guess it's always about being realistic, right? It's like, what does your actual roster look like? Did you have Mike Evans and Michael Pittman, and Brandon Ayuk, which on opening day looked incredible. The first month looked incredible. And now all of a sudden, you're starting Elijah Moore as your wide receiver too. Like at that point, it's like, yeah, dude, like I need, in order to give you this backup who might not even play, I need to have, a guy that I can ship out there every single week. So that's when I'm looking at DeAndre Hopkins, Quentin Johnston, the guys I just mentioned, Marcus Valdez-Scantling, who's reemerged after 2 seasons. Like some of those guys, I mean, I'm at least going to ask for it. Like Drake London's been really up and down, but I think you can, both buy and sell a player like Drake London, Marvin Harrison, some of those guys. So again, I'm going to try my best, but you got to be realistic with what you need and what they do. It always has to be as fair as possible, but everything is always, subjective based on how you feel about your roster and fantasy football in general.
Okay. All right, let's get down to the next tier we have. It's stash at the right price. I don't think these guys are really guys you're going to trade for. The first tier of guys you'll probably get trades. So these are kind of the stash guys, maybe more realistically speaking, to a certain extent. We have Cam Akers at the top of this list. Roshan Johnson, shout out to Jamie. There you go, inside the top 10. Justice Hill, Jalen Wright, Devin Singletary, Tajay Spears, Gus Edwards, Damian Pierce, Audric Estime. You broke my heart. I love you, but I hate you at the same time. And Jerome Ford. Dave, up to you on this one here. Like, let's talk about maybe more ad drops here. Like, if you're currently let's say a Aaron Jones owner and you're at the top of this list, like what kind of players are you willing to drop to keep, maybe scoop up Cam Akers as your handcuff to your RB2?
Well, I mean, from my point of view, there's guys on this list that I value differently than some of the other analysts at Razzball. And, for me, I would take a shot on a guy like Akers and probably dump like a Gus Edwards because, Gus Edwards hasn't been playing a ton of snaps since he came back. I mean, he's played 25% and 16% of the snaps the last couple of games, and he hasn't really done much. It's more like, they're throwing the ball more, and they have J.K. Dobbins, who they've been riding, and God bless him. I love J.K. Dobbins. I'm glad he's healthy again. So that's kind of like when I look at a guy like Cam Akers or Dameon Pierce or guys like that. To me, those are kind of interchangeable parts, and I'm kind of looking for what I think the best value is out of each of the guys. And I'm looking at the touches they've had, and I want to see what they've been doing. I mean, when I look at a guy like, let's say Trey Benson. Trey Benson's got a ton of upside, and I love Trey Benson over the long term. But I see a guy that hasn't had more than 5 PPR points except the last 2 weeks in blowout wins for the Cardinals. So I know he's high, and I value him pretty high as well, but probably not as high as some of the other guys.
Now, Scott, before we get into it, I do want to ask you one just like a slightly different question. So, like, there are some big-time names that have not been good all year. Guys that really stand out to me like DJ Moore, where at this point, are you still, like, when you get to this level of handcuff, and maybe if you want to even talk about tier 1, is there guys like DJ Moore that you're willing to drop to pick up these guys and just lock up that backfield? Does anybody in tier 2 kind of entice you in that way?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, some other decent names here. I mean, Jaden Reed started off incredibly for the Packers. He's been kind of disappeared outside of one big catch. I would get rid of him. Xavier Worthy, who I think people just hold on to because he's with Mahomes, but he's extremely boomer bust. Deebo Samuel, you're not going to drop Deebo Samuel, but he's not. I mean, look, dude, I'm Deebo's number 1 fan, and he's not my number 1 player right now. Keenan Allen, I mean, Jamison Williams, some of these other guys that, like, and you mentioned DJ Moore, some of these other guys that you drafted high, I wouldn't be dropping all of them. But when push comes to shove, if I'm in a 12-team, 14, 16-team league, you got to make a decision. All these wide receivers I just mentioned are wide receiver 46 to 60 over the last month. We're not talking like wide receiver 2s and disappointments. We're talking unstartable, tanking that roster spot for you for the last month, and you just can't have that. So those are guys that, again, it's all temperament on who you're going to drop versus try to trade away right now. But there's a couple players. I mean, Dave mentioned Cam Akers. I don't like Cam Akers. I don't think he's a great running back. He'd be in a great situation should it happen. Now he's back in Minnesota, right? So, like, he's a little bit higher than I even want him on my list. Jordan Mason is a guy that a lot of us here at Razzball have him in the top 3 of handcuffs, and I get it. He's the other Christian McCaffrey. The problem is he's not. He was for a month. He was running back 3. I'm sorry, let me change this to the only proper setting. 1 second here. He was the running back, 4. So over the first month of the season, basically, he was running back.
Weeks.
Yeah, he was running back 5, 11, 24, and 5 again. After that, though, still running, of course, because Christian wasn't back until week 9 or week 10. Rather, he was RB 32, 31, 30, 63, 63, and 60 again. He's had 3 carries in 2 games since Christian McCaffrey came back. If you have Christian McCaffrey, keep Jordan Mason. If you don't, drop him. And then there's Guerrero. There's other running backs that are like getting work if CMC were to go down again, plus Debo and everything else, and Brock Purdy's throwing the ball all over the yard. So there's guys that, like, you can't go on, I drafted this guy in the 4th round. It's week 12, and we got to make decisions.
Yeah. And I think guys like, Sky just mentioned DJ Moore, Deebo Samuel, Jaden Reed. You got to decide when it's time to to eat the discount and still try to get something in return. And I think the guys we're talking about as stashes in the running back room, those are the perfect guys to try to sell these guys for. I mean, if I'm going to dangle a DJ Moore out there, I'm going to try and get a guy like Jalen Moore, who I don't value as much as, say, a Rashad White or Bucky Irving. but I still think he has value going down the stretch. And if I can, get a guy like that for DJ Moore, I'm willing to eat the amount of cost I just am going to eat.
Yeah, I would say this. The DJ, when I don't have a player like DJ Moore was off my radar this year. I wasn't as high on him as most consensus was, but like if I have him on my roster, it's like, like honestly, like there is nothing going to change. There's too much competition for targets. The offense is kind of stagnant, and honestly, at this point, like it's hard to say that I would trade him away for like Gus Edwards, because that's probably not realistic. I don't really care too much. There's a certain point of this tier where honestly, if I was the Aaron Jones owner and DJ Moore was my wide receiver 5 right now based on his production, and honestly, if I was thin at running back, there's a scenario where I could say I'm relying on Aaron Jones to be my RB2, and if he goes down, I have basically squadouche. I would rather have Cam Akers ready to go than DJ Moore as my wide receiver 5. There are scenarios where that makes sense. It is what it is. Trust me. Michael Pittman comes to mind, where the name is much like there's certain people in your league that will they'll care more about Michael Pittman's name than maybe stashing the upside of Cam Akers if they don't have Aaron Jones. So definitely agree. There's definitely a scenario where that could take place. All right, let's do some a couple more that we have here for deeper names. So these are kind of like the deepest like stashes. Like this is the group where we think there is some value. If the starter went down, there's probably value here where you could get these guys. And honestly, I think one of these guys were probably two of them. I think I would actually put a tier up, but let's get into it. It's Kenneth Gainwell, Emmanuel Wilson, Jamal Williams, Khalil Herbert, and Antonio Gibson. So let's toss it up to you, Dave, first on this one. Talking quickly about these deeper league stashes. Is there any of these guys that really stand out to you as someone maybe you'd probably put in tier 2, or are you not stashing any of these guys?
I would probably take a shot at a guy like Wilson now that Marshawn Lloyd is out of the way again. I don't expect that every game for the Packers is going to be a close game where they're going to need Josh Jacobs all year. If they get the upper hand on them, a guy like Emmanuel Wilson's going to get a lot of run. Gainwell, I'm kind of, I think Ben's got a good point in that specific scenario where I don't know that he's going to get enough touches by himself. But Jamal Williams, I wish he could be. I wish he could be that guy. 2022 was such a great year for him, but he scored 2 touchdowns since he's been with the Saints. And Herbert is, I don't know why Cincinnati traded for him right now. Gibson and Emmanuel Wilson for me are the guys that I might move up a tier.
Scott?
Man, I was just looking through the Green Bay situation. They have Chris Brooks there as well, who not a lot of people know, but he's actually playing quite well. In the preseason, he was like 17 carries for 100 yards for Miami, got waived. Green Bay picked him up when Aaron Jones left. I just think he's a good player, so he's another free square there. Isaac Garendo as well to pick up and say if you don't have Jordan Mason. There's a couple comments here that we'll get to, so hang tight with us, Jamie and Frizzell. We see you over there. We'll get to your comments in a second, but some of these questions are really enticing as to what we're talking about here. For me, man, again, like I just am realizing I compared my own rankings with the consensus of the team, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players that I am 3 spots or more lower than the consensus. I don't know why that is in general, but like I thought that was kind of surprising. So I don't know. It just, some of these handcuffs like don't matter to me. Like if the starter's not awesome and they're not doing super well, I don't like the offense. I don't trust the quarterback. They're hit or miss on, game scheme. Like it doesn't matter. So I guess it's just to throw that out there. Like you don't have to automatically have the second running back to your starting running back. Like an example would be Justice Hill. I like him as a PPR guy. But if Derrick Henry were to go down, Justice Hill's not getting 25 carries a game.
No.
He's going to get 10 touches like he does. They might be cooler touches and a goal line here and there, but he's not going to just become Derrick Henry, obviously. Jamal Williams was Alvin Kamara a couple years ago. I don't see that happening again. So like some of these are just, I think, overblown a little bit, especially in this region. The guys we just talked about, the first 10, 15 names we've talked about tonight, absolutely could be that guy in front of them, with the exception of CMC, whatever. But after that, I really would just maybe start, dropping these guys unless you really believe in their situation. And Audric Estime is a perfect example. Last week, we all blew a bunch of fab. We all talked him up on Rasball because it made sense. And then Javonte Williams shows back up, right? Guys down here, like it's just Antonio Gibson. He was awesome 3 years ago in PPR leagues. Like we haven't even heard of him since. I'm not wasting a roster spot on some of these guys.
The issue I have is like this is a theoretical world we live in where all the RB1s decide to disappear. Like, so this is where the rankings kind of came in my mind. I'm like, okay, every RB1's gone for the season. How would I rank these guys? So, but if Saquon Barkley goes down, honestly, Gainwell, I feel like Gainwell is the guy they're going to trust. They're in a playoff hunt. They need to go with guys they trust. I know Shipley's a nice player, but like Gainwell is going to get probably 15 touches, in that offense. So I'm not going to poo-poo the idea, but the problem is like, I don't know if I'm going to be dropping. Like the question comes back to the Pittmans, the DJ Moores of the world. Yeah, maybe I do kind of rather have Gainwell and Emmanuel Wilson on my roster if I'm a Jacobs owner than Michael Pittman and DJ Moore right now. I know that sounds crazy to say, but like. But at the same time, I'm not acquiring these guys. But I think when it comes to this deeper names, like there is value for a guy like Wilson because I honestly don't know what the deal with Lloyd. I think the appendectomy is something where you can come back from in a few weeks. I'm not sure, but if Josh Jacobs goes down, Wilson has looked decent and he has earned a decent amount he earns a handful of touches every single week. So. I love the Packers. So, like, my mindset for him is, like, if I am the Jacobs owner right now today and Jacobs is done with his bye, like, I kind of wouldn't mind having Wilson stashed on my bench. But then it really gets to a point where, like, for this kind of player, like, who is, like, the guy that you have? Like, Cedric Tillman. Would you drop Cedric Tillman for Emmanuel Wilson? I don't know if I would do that. I'm not sure. What's your thoughts there, Dave?
No, I probably wouldn't drop Tillman. I mean, just for the sheer fact of the volume of passing offense that the Cleveland Browns have right now. I mean, they're really sustaining like, 3 wide receivers and a tight end right now. So no, not like a guy like Tillman, but and I'm not dropping DJ Moore. I'm not dropping Michael Pittman. I'm going to try and take 25 to 50 cents on the dollar before I take 0 on the dollar for those guys. But there's plenty of other guys out there that I've picked up in the interim. A guy like Jalen Coker, or even a guy like Xavier Legette. I haven't seen a lot out of them yet. Adam Thielen's coming back. It's the Panthers. They're a good running offense, but they're not that great of a passing offense, especially with Bryant Young there. So guys like that, I have no problem dropping for, say, a Gainwell or an Emmanuel.
One of the players that was one of the most difficult for me to rank based on like how we were talking about him in draft season versus what we were waiting for all season, which is where we're at now, is Tyjae Spears. And I know Bob was super in love, and rightfully so. So was I. And then he gets injured, and then Tony Pollard shows up. Like, it's Tyjae Spears season for like a week and a half, and then they get Tony Pollard, and we're like, that's weird. Then Tyjae gets hurt, and he doesn't really do much. And then Tony Pollard's awesome, but Tennessee's not good. And then he comes back. It's like, but the consensus for Tyjae Spears is 14 from Rasball, from our team, 14. I have him at 22. Yeah. And I only put him that high because like he's supposed to be good, but he hasn't been better than RB 30 outside of 1 week. And like the touches I don't like, he doesn't score. I don't trust the offense. So like there's certain players like that feel like, they sound like, they look attractive on the waiver. Like, oh my God, Tyjae Spears is available. Yeah. And then I just start diving deeper because this is what we do. And I'm like, so what? So
I feel a little bit differently about Tyjae Spears. I think if Tony Pollard goes down and Tyjae Spears is healthy, then I think Tyjae's got a pretty good role. I think that's where, when Bobby's talking about a guy like Gainwell, that's how I feel about a guy like Tyjae Spears, right? You're right. He hasn't done much of anything yet this year, but the talent is there. And I think if the opportunity presents itself, he'll rise to the occasion.
He's also got a concussion, and their schedule down the stretch stinks. But anyway, just a guy that I had a major discrepancy with that I just want to pinpoint.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. That's what we're talking about.
And by the way, everyone's got to factor in that we are assuming that every RB1 was injured, and that's how I rank these guys. So, yeah, I'm basing it on situations of all these guys. But if Tony Pollard's the only RB1 that goes down, honestly, Tyjae Spears is going to be on everybody. He's going to be 100% owned in every league that cares because he's going to be a starting running back. So he's going to be important. Now, the question becomes, if you're a Tony Pollard owner, since we're already talking about it, we have really two different opinions here. So if you're a Tony Pollard owner, let me ask you guys this: what is the trade that you're willing to make? I know Sky probably says he won't trade for him, but Dave, you might be someone who does. I guess the question is what is honestly is a Devonta Smith for Tyjae Spears to handcuff Tony Pollard make sense to you, or is that too much?
I don't think I would have to pay Devonta Smith for Tyjae Spears at this point. No way. Because, Sky's point is, I disagree with it at a high level, but his point on a micro level is Tyjae Spears just hasn't done a whole hell of a lot this year, right? I can sit there and say, Sky has scored 50, 60 points for the whole season, 70 points. And, I'm willing to pay much lower than Devonta Smith.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to. I'm gonna take too much more time, but I think that's an overshoot for sure. Devonta Smith is a starter. Tyjae Spears is not a starter, and he's not that good when he gets work. I can't. The difference for me, and a major difference with handcuffs, if the guy goes down, does the guy that's coming in, is he gonna be 80% at least of that guy? We're not talking about Jalen Warren and David Montgomery, right? We're talking about backups for a reason, who don't get a lot of work anyway. We see this all the time. We spend a bunch of fab every year on weeks and weeks and weeks. The guy goes down, you spend a bunch of fab, right? Carson Steele. Okay, these guys show up every week, and then they go Audric Estime, and they do nothing because they're not as good as the starter. They did get the work, and they just kind of fall back into a backup role. So, yes, they're valuable. Yes, they should be considered. If you have free spaces, do it. I'm not saying I'm anti-handcuff, obviously, but I'm not as hungry for these guys as I think the industry at large is. And I'd rather have a wide receiver 5 like Cedric Tillman, who's getting 9 targets a game with Jameis Winston to cover my bye weeks and cover Mike Williams and Michael Pittman that's been injured, or wait for Puka Nacua to get hurt again. It's just a different way to handle my roster, I guess.
But I think that's kind of the consensus, though. Tier 2 of the guys we talked about aren't really big-time trade guys. And really the guys you're trading for are Tier 1 guys, the guys we discussed in the beginning, where Zach Charbonnet, if you're a Kenneth Walker owner, has a shit ton of value for you. And the question is, would you trade Devonta Smith for a guy like that?
Yes.
That's a better question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think Tyjae that was too much of a gap for me.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's just try, because the last 5 weeks, Smith has been average, but he's still better over the course of the season, he's been better. But I'm just trying to find, because we can pick on DJ Moore and Michael Pittman all we want. They have the name, but they have been so bad. Because the other thing you have to think about is the opposite end of the trade, where there's a certain level of a player where I'd rather have Tyjae, if I'm in a deeper format, I'd rather have Tyjae Spears than DJ Moore. I might be I don't want DJ Moore. You can keep him. I'd rather if Tony Pollard goes down, I got myself a high upside RB2, and then instead of DJ Moore, who's been trash all year. So there is other avenues where you have to maybe pay a little more, but we're just saying that Tier 2 and Tier 3 are not the guys you do that for. Tier 1 is where maybe you pay up a little bit to your wide receiver 3-4, maybe trade away some of the depth there to acquire a guy who could really make a difference if the starter goes down. All right, before we go,
reasonable.
I'm sorry. And for me, once we got past those first 6 those first 6 twofers that we were talking about at the beginning of the show, the Montgomerys and the Etiennes and all those, for me, I started with the best offenses. Who do I want as a backup in the best offense? Williams, because I think that's the guy that's probably going to have a role and is probably going to return quite a lot of value. So even though Jordan Mason hasn't done much of anything since week 4, I still think Jordan Mason's probably the best bet to have a good role if McCaffrey goes down.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I listen, Ray Davis, we saw one game, he had 25 touches when he had no James Cook. So that's why I had him at 1. Kareem Hunt has put together a bunch of weeks in a row where he's been solid as a borderline RB1. And plus it's Patrick Mahomes. Yeah. You know what I mean? So like he's a stud too. And like, listen, there's also avenues where like you have to look at how the offenses have treated their running backs in the past. So like what I mean by that is the offensive coordinator love to use a workhorse. Guys like Sean McVay. And listen, I got to admit, it haunts me. I've lost hours of sleep knowing that I faded, quote unquote, Kyren Williams because he was the freaking punt returner. I don't want to say murder. Murder's very aggressive, but I want to like stub the toe of the person who sent out that tweet just because like I was on Kyren and I was like, this is Sir Sean McVay. And then I was like, all right, I dropped him a half a round and I didn't get him in one league. And I'm like, man, because Sean McVay loves his workhorses and Blake Corum probably goes into that role. I know Ronnie Rivers is also there, but like and like Trey Benson, another thing, James Conner. I mean, talk about Mount Rushmore of players in my life, but he's always been like they has such a good role, and the offensive coordinator allows him to do that. It's the guy who had Nick Chubb previously, so like honestly, Trey Benson was also. We don't know what Trey Benson would look like with 25 touches. We have no idea, but we know the role is there, and that's why he's really high in our rankings because I actually have him higher than Jordan Mason because of that theoretical upside of the scheme and kind of the talent of this guy. So yeah, I hear you. All right, let's.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, for me, it was what I've seen. I mean, I know I love the idea of Blake Corum, but right now Blake Corum is nothing but an idea. I mean, he's had a couple of dozen touches on offense all year. So yeah, it's possible that if Kyren Williams goes down, Blake Corum's the guy right away. Or it's possible that Sean McVay runs out and re-signs Darrell Henderson.
Nice. CJ Anderson.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's do it all.
Yep.
Yeah. Blake Corum's just better than Kyren Williams, though. Like, he's more explosive. He's not going to get the starting role.
All right.
But, like, he's just –
Jesus. Okay.
It's a better per touch, man. We saw this 2 years ago that Sean McVay has his guy. And he rides the wheels until they fall off, right? Pour one out for Todd Gurley. But when Blake Corum gets an opportunity, I think he would be just as good. And I'm with you on James Conner. But if Trey Benson got the same exact work that James Conner got, he would smash. Like some of these guys are just better than not getting work.
So I'm inspired now. I'm going to go gather the Infinity Stones, snap my fingers, and get rid of all the running back ones.
That would be fun, huh? That would be fun. We need a Madden simulation or something to help us out. Get on it, world. Get on it, kids.
A Marvel Madden crossover.
Yeah, let's do it.
All
right. So let's get to a couple questions. By the way, there's a section called Tier 4. It's called Don't Bother. That includes some running backs, including like Zeke Elliott, Zamir White, Trey Sermon. Even Sky Guasco said Amir Abdullah because he's not even interested in whatever the hell the Raiders got going on there. So, there's –
Bob, I do want to give you 1 second to back up your Giants because I need help with this particular situation with, Tommy D coming back in the mix. Another guy that I had a lot of trouble ranking was Devin Singletary. I put him in tier 4, and I knew that you wouldn't allow me on the show if I did that, so I recalculated, threw off the entire ranking averages, and redid it. I threw him at 18, which I don't feel great about. Consensus is 13. Dave Crews has him at 6.
Nice.
So I need to hear from both of you guys about Devin Singletary. I've never been impressed. I'm all about short kings. I just don't think he's that good. I don't love the offense. I hate it even more now. Shout out to Tommy DeVito. Yeah. And I don't want any part of Tyrone Tracy is a goddess. I'm all about it. But if he goes down, good. I don't want anything to do with the Giants. I'm selling Malik Neighbors as our show last night, blah, blah, blah. Devin Singletary, I did out of respect, Bob, because I love you. But I'm not feeling it at all. Dave has him at 6. I'd like to hear from both of you guys on Devin Singletary. Then we can move to the questions.
I'll go. I've seen Devin Singletary perform. Okay. I've seen him have a significant role. I've seen him perform. I've seen him on 3 different NFL teams. He got hurt in New York. Tyrone Tracy took over. That happens. But if Tyrone Tracy gets hurt, Devin Singletary is going to have a solid role. I don't have to worry about Eric Gray taking away Devin Singletary's role. Okay. I don't care much for the New York Giants offense much either. But if I want touches and I want opportunity, I want points, Devin Singletary is one of the guys that we're talking about that I want above some of the other guys.
Yeah, so Tommy DeVito, Daniel Jones hasn't been amazing this year, so I don't feel like I'm overly concerned. I don't really know what's going on with that whole situation. Anyway, you bring in Drew Lock. I don't know what the hell the point of that was for making the QB2, but that's neither here or there. I'm excited for some Tommy DeVito. But Singletary, the workhorse role is there. Like we saw it the first 4 weeks of the season. He was getting, a bunch of touches, high teens and touches every single week. Not sure about the offense. So I have him at 17 because I honestly don't really believe necessarily the Giants offense is going to be great, but they have a decent schedule. So I guess the question for you, Dave, is since you are the highest, like you will have him as a tier 1 guy then. So what is the line of player you're willing to trade? If you're a Tyrone Tracy owner right now, and let's say you don't have depth at running back, let's say you do have some wide receiver depth. Let's just go back to the well with the guys like Devonta Smith, or if you want to do Brian Thomas Jr. types, would you trade those guys to pick up Devin Singletary?
No, I definitely would not. Part of the value of Singletary to me is I can get him super cheap. Heck, there's some leagues I could probably get him on the waiver wire.
Yeah.
But if Thanos comes along and snaps Tyrone Tracy out of existence, I know Devin Singletary is going to step into that role. It's not going to be Eric Gray, and it's not going to be anybody on their practice squad. It very well could be Blake Corum. It very well could be Trey Benson, but there are other guys on those rosters that have also had work. So until I can see them actually do something in the NFL, I'm not going to assume they're going to step into like a workhorse role. I think Blake Corum is a talented guy, but for some reason, they won't even spell Kyron Williams with him. So something is lacking there from the NFL games perspective in my mind.
Yeah.
I'm more of a scheme guy though. I think McVay has been proven time and time again. It's nothing to do with Kyron Williams. He just rides one guy, and that's just been proven time and time again. So I'm not worried about Blake Corum. It actually makes me more. That's why we differ a little bit, because that makes me more excited for Blake Corum, because if Kyron goes down, I know he's willing to ride one guy. Right. And early on in the season, it was Ronnie Rivers who was getting some touches, but Blake Corum kind of earned his role as the RB2. So, but I hear you. I think the issue with Singletary, though, is let's say hypothetically speaking, yeah, I understand it's cheap, but there's a certain level where guys won't trade you for garbage. Honestly, DJ Moore, Michael Pittman, we keep picking on them because their name values aren't performing. But even guys like Jaden Reed, would you trade Jaden Reed for Devin Singletary to lock up that handcuff?
Then I guess I'm confused. Am I a buyer or I'm a seller?
No, you're the Tyrone Tracy owner, and you want to try to acquire Devin Singletary. Are you willing to trade? Because if I'm the Devin Singletary owner, I don't want your garbage. I'd rather just take the handcuff upside of another guy. So my question is, you have to entice me a little bit. How high are you willing to go to get Devin Singletary?
Probably wide receiver, at the low end of the wide receiver 3, top end of the wide receiver 4. Let me put it this way. I like Devin Singletary. I think he has a good role, but how I value him on my team and how I value him as a player is a little bit different.
Dave, okay. Let's do him or him. One of my favorite games.
I mean, are we talking about the rest of 2024 or are we talking about beyond?
I'm talking about this season. It's redraft only. This is not This is just this season. And by the way, this is a hypothetical world where if you have the wide receiver depth on your roster, that if you're willing to trade a guy who is like your blended wide receiver 3-4, where you have another guy on the roster that will step in and kind of fill that role for you. Granted, is the deal, if you just look at the deal itself, it's bad. Like, yeah, obviously trading Tank Dell for Devin Singletary makes no freaking sense eye to eye. But the question is, like, where is the line to entice somebody to trade your handcuff if you feel like I have the depth at this wide receiver position? I guess my question is, like, no one wants to give up. Like, Cedric Tillman is a good name. Would you trade Cedric Tillman to pick up Devin Singletary?
If I have Cedric Tillman, I probably have 4 or 5 other solid guys. So I have rosters where I have Cooper Kupp, Garrett Wilson, and, another stud. I have one roster where I have Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson. So if I've got guys like that, then I can afford to, trade a guy like Tillman, right?
Right.
So, there's relative value as well. So if we're talking in a vacuum, I'm probably not trading a guy like Tillman for a guy like Singletary. But if I'm set at wide receiver and Tillman's like my 3rd or 4th flex, and I have there's likely I have another guy I can replace.
So Scott, I know you're a little bit different on this too, but forget about Devin Singletary. Let's just talk tier 1 then, because like technically tier 1 is me and you don't have Singletary in tier 1, so we would disagree on Singletary than Dave. But the question is, like, I think we would agree, like, Tillman might make sense for the Jordan Mason, Zach Cabernet kind of player, Tyler Algier to an extent.
Cabernet, I love you so much, bro. You're just it'll never fail. Okay, Tyler Algier. I would argue earlier. I meant to make this point earlier. I would argue that he and Bijan are number 7. Because Algier gets plenty of work as a backup, but c'est la vie. Trey Benson, Braylon Allen, who Dave has underneath Devin Singletary, but I've got above Cam Akers, whatever. These are the type of guys. Cedric Wilson, if he's my wide receiver 5, I would trade Cedric Wilson to acquire those guys. I don't think you're going to – I mean, if you really need to, you could also do it. If you're as high as Dave is, you could do that as well. I just wouldn't for those particular players. But for my tier – whoever your tier 1 is, forget the player. Whoever your tier 1 handcuffs are, Cedric Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., JSN, Bob brought up earlier, DJ Moore, whatever. If somebody else values these guys, they value them. You don't. You need the backup running back. They might not care about a running back, especially if they don't have the starter. So you both don't care about the player you're trading. You would be shocked at what kind of deals you can get made as long as you have the proper conversation.
Yeah. I agree.
So from that point of view, do I think that Devin Singletary is a very valuable trade chip? Then I probably vastly overvalued him.
Yeah, you didn't overvalue, because, like, honestly, this is kind of the point of the process. Everybody has a slightly different view on the player themselves, but you understood the assignment in the sense that, like, you identified your tier 1 guys. Like, if you really feel like the Giants running back role is worth having on your roster, if you have a Tyrone Tracy and you're riding Tyrone Tracy rest of season, and if Tyrone Tracy goes down and you feel like Devin Singletary with the current situation will be an RB2, he's going to have a lot more value than a Cedric Tillman will be as your wide receiver 5. Yeah. It's that simple. So, but like, I don't feel like the Singletary role makes up for the fact that the Giants offense is a sloppy mess. So I'd rather just have the upside of Tillman in that case. But me and Sky have different guys in tier 1, for example, the Braylon Allens, and those guys, to me, by the way, right now, they're just burning a hole in some team's roster who they don't have a lot of standalone value. Not a lot of these guys have standalone value right now. We're talking 8 fantasy points, maybe. Like, who the frick's winning with 6 to 8 fantasy points every single week? And that's on the high end. A lot of these guys are scoring 4 because they're backups. So to me, that 4 points doesn't matter because I just want my handcuff. And so I'll give up a guy who scores 5 more fantasy points a week, and that might make the difference for that other guy who could flex him now because he scores 11 fantasy points, and that's flex worthy versus the 6. For me, that's like everything, because if that guy goes down in front, who I'm starting every week, that guy goes from 6 to 16. So, because he's the starter now, like Braylon Allen. So that's kind of the whole philosophy behind this whole discussion. So, and by the way, our rankings are different for everybody. So if you this is really just a thought process. Our rankings are up for everybody. You could view other tier 2 guys as tier 1. This discussion is valid for your tiers too. So like if you view, like, perfect example is Dave views Devin Singletary as a tier 1 handcuff, then you should use the tier 1 philosophy on Devin Singletary. That's what the point of this discussion is. That's really what we're trying to do, is help you guys identify what the trades and players you can trade. Like, and here's a good example, guys, too. Like Rico Dowdle, Jalen Warren. Like, let's kind of identify maybe a running back situation, because it might be easier to trade a running back 4 or 3 to get your handcuff, because running back to running back might be easier. So I guess the bottom of the bin right now to me are guys like Jalen Warren, maybe even Tank Bigsby. I don't know, his value is at an all-time low, so it might be a lot easier to get him. It might be hard to acquire him in the sense of, like, I'd rather have Ray Davis upside than whatever hell is going on with Jacksonville right now.
I would trade.
Go ahead. What's your thoughts?
I would trade Rico Dowdle, who's a starter. Okay. I don't trust the Cowboys for anything right now. CeeDee Lamb. I don't trust anybody else. We talked about it last night with Dave and Jeff. I would trade Rico Dowdle for me personally. I would trade him for Ray Davis, Braylon Allen, Trey Benson, Tyler Algier. If I had Kyron, which I don't, Blake Corum. For me, I would go like a RB3, who you're probably starting every week. I would trade Rico Dowdle straight up for a handcuff who I might not start. Ideally, I never play him because my starter's healthy. But if I have to, I jump up. And just one last point, I'll let Dave take it off. We can get to these questions. Dave and I have kind of a varying difference on some of these rankings. I agree with him 100%. Like the players are a little bit different for me and him, but the philosophies remain the same. If you trust a team, you trust a player, you trust a situation, go with that guy. I don't like Devin Singletary personally. He does, no big deal. He doesn't like Cam Akers. I do. But it's kind of the same idea. It's like you believe in the system or you don't, and then the player just kind of falls in line. But Dave and I are actually quite aligned in, I'd say, 90% of our rankings, but we have to pinpoint the guys that we're separated on for, conversation. But as far as like the thinking process, I think he and I are actually quite in line.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's probably more difference in philosophy than
and that's why we do these
judging players, right? So
yeah. I guess my question for you guys, here's a guy that I want to ask about, and this might be polarizing, is Nick Chubb. Because the Browns' rushing attack has not looked good. Nick Chubb is still trying to earn his way back. And I guess my question is, would you trade Nick Chubb for
You're okay,
you're good, Dave. You're all
You're
good.
live. You're live.
Yeah. Did I bail?
No,
bail? I didn't figure both of you guys bailed. So
it would be funny if, like, Dave, as soon as I bring up Nick Chubb, he gets upset and he pretends like he's frozen and he just leaves. That'd be great. But Nick Chubb, my question for you guys is, like, for your tier 1 handcuff.
Yeah. It might just be to plug in your computer, so sometimes that holds it down a little bit. Nick Chubb for me, man. I mean, top dog. That's right. He popped off.
No, I'm just so let's just kind of write this. Well, Dave kind of figures out his computer situation. Dave, when you feel like you're back up and running, you can just add yourself back in. But my question is, like, is the tier 1 guys, like, let's just go back to the Ray Davis, the Braylon Allen, the guys we really like. If you're a Breece Hall owner, are you willing to trade Chubb to get one of those guys?
Sure. Which breaks my heart.
Okay. All right, let's get into some questions here. Let's get into – Dave's popping in twice. Here we go. All right, let's get into it here. All right, so how crazy would it be if I was to trim my wide receiver fat and pick up more – we got 2 Dave Cruzes here. All right, I'm gonna hide the old one, see how that goes.
Get rid of the old one.
All right. How crazy would it be to trim my wide receiver fat, pick up my more RB handcuffs? I currently own Trey Benson and Roshan in a 14-team league, but Ray Davis, Blake, Wright are still on waivers.
Okay, dudes, I'm going to drop because this connection is just toast.
All right, Dave. Talk to you. All right, let's get through these questions really quick. I think it depends solely on the wide receiver. I would have to drop, let's see, we got Xavier Leggett, Pop Douglas, Alex Pierce, and Darius Slayton. I'm flexing Pierce this week for possibility of boom, and I'm considering Slayton rest of season matchup, which is why I have these guys. So what's your thoughts here?
Man, I love this. This is one that I was alluding to earlier on. I want to go back to the first part of this. There we go. I want the handcuffs here. And I want the handcuffs because of who they are. I don't want them just because they're handcuffs. But for me, Trey Benson, Roschon Johnson, Ray Davis, Blake Corum, and Jalen Ryder all top 10 for me personally. So if you can trim the fat at wide receiver and bulk up. Now, you don't need 5 or 6 handcuffs that are killing roster spots of guys that aren't going to play. So don't overdo this. But if you have stud wide receivers that you don't really need, or you don't need the depth for wide receiver, then yes, it's more valuable to have these kind of high-end handcuffs. So within reason, I would absolutely, bone up on those guys, assuming you have the bench depth.
Yeah. The problem is for me is like, I get it, but it is like a lottery ticket. Yep. Like, like these are kind of like one of those things where if it hits, great. But if it doesn't and the RB1 doesn't get hurt, you're getting nothing. You can't even flex these guys. So my whole thought, I wouldn't do too much of it. I think really in reality for me, if I don't have the RB1 and I'm just looking at these guys, I need to look at my roster and make sure I understand, do I have my starting lineup? Is it ready to go rest of season where I don't need to start any of these guys? Because if my mind is like, if I have a flex spots all taken care of, my wide receiver 3 is all taken care of, and this is just all bench stashes, I'd rather stash Ray Davis, Blake Corum, and those guys than stash Darius Slayton, for example, on my bench if I know I'm not starting them. However, if I need to flex a guy and I need 8 to 10 fantasy points, I know for a fact that Darius Slayton has a better shot at doing that than these guys. So I'll definitely keep that that in mind as well. All right. Quan, Carter, Bobby, and Sky have been taking turns back-ending each other. Secret lovers. Back-ending meaning like a sexual thing, I'm assuming. Listen, hey, it is what it is. The guy's great. I love him. God bless him.
Same.
So for Sizzle, to add context to my stud wide receivers are Flowers or Smith, Olave on RR, and my sub RBs are Mixon and Bijan. So he's kind of just trying to give context to that question. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm okay with doing like a hybrid thing of it, but to be honest with you, like you can't do too much of it because as soon as a player, if you need to start some guy, you're going to be starting a guy might get you 5 fantasy points, and that could kill you.
Yeah. The reality is old friend and fellow co-host of Bob and I, when we did a show previous to Razzball, my good buddy Lucas Kaser used to always say something that was so easy, but you had to say it. You need guys that score points. But if Pierce, Douglas, and Slayton are scoring points and Ray Davis and Benson aren't, that should be the priority of your team. If you have space and you have the ability and the longevity and things like that, if you have a great record, you're sitting pretty for the playoffs. You're already in. You're looking good anyway. You just need to build like long-term depth, right? You don't need a wide receiver 6. Then, yeah, make those changes. If you're looking to get into the playoffs, I don't care who your player is and how much it sucks to start them. You need guys that might score 10 points instead of maybe 6. And it might be that brutal, but like you have to have that, right, in PPR leagues. So I like handcuffs. This is a handcuff show. We're batting for handcuffs, but don't just load up on handcuffs because we're talking about them. Some of them are more valuable than others, but Bob's absolutely right. And Dave brought it up a bunch. If these guys don't get the opportunity, they're literally handcuffs for a reason. They're not starters. So yes, we do have Philip Lindsay shows up every once in a while, and it's amazing and super fun. But you also have 4 different Colts that have been trying to be Jonathan Taylor for the last 2 years who just aren't. And one of them is Zach Moss. He gets another opportunity, then he's done. So it's just like you can't overblow this stuff.
One thing to circle back a little bit on this is like if these guys are on waivers, it probably also means the guys in your league, either they don't care, so like they almost don't even offer any trade value because if they're on, like if Blake Corum's on waivers, the Kyron Williams owner clearly he's not paying attention. I mean, obviously that person should have Blake Corum. He should not be on waivers. But the problem is that, like, if you pick up Blake Corum, trade deadline passes, you're holding this guy who's going to maybe get 3 carries in a game. He's not useful for your team. And he doesn't offer any trade value because clearly the other team does not value them. So my only thought process is maybe you take a look at the guys you currently have. If you already have, sounds like you already have a handful of handcuffs already on your roster. You got Trey Benson and Roshan Johnson. Maybe you go and poke around and look at the DeAndre Swift and James Conner owner in your league and say, hey, what would you want for Trey Benson? Acquire a flex asset and then go scoop up these other tickets on the waiver wire. So then you'll get an asset that you could quote unquote start each week from the trade. And on top of that, you could still pick up some lottery tickets off waivers. So I think that's kind of the direction I would go in.
And pay attention to bye weeks.
All right, that's all we got today, folks. Once again, this is another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. I want to thank both Dave Crews and Sky Guasco for joining tonight's show. This was the must-have handcuffs. And make sure you join us and subscribe to this channel because we have a bunch of shows all week long, a lot of fun. And make sure you jump on every Sunday live for 2 hours before kickoff as we break down all your start-sit questions. And we also discuss key injuries, weather updates, everything you need to know up until kickoff. And finally, make sure you go to razzball.com. We do a lot of fun stuff over there. We have great articles and great content. We also have the slot versus wide points per game allowed tool. We have a lot of good resources for you over there that you could really help you win your fantasy leagues. And finally, like Sky always likes to bring up, if you're ever on the go, you want to listen to the podcast, you could get our podcast everywhere where you get your podcast currently. Thank you for joining us once again, folks. We are out of here.
Go Bigs.